My name is Michael. I'm 42 years old, and for almost 2 decades I gave everything I had to the world of corporate finance. I wasn't just some number cruncher. I wasn't the guy in the back office. I was a senior financial analyst for Barton and Crane Holdings, a private equity firm based in Chicago. The firm wasn't small. We were managing close to $30 billion in assets, and I was trusted with the most sensitive deals. Mergers, acquisitions, restructuring projects, where entire cities held their breath to see if companies would survive. For my work, I was paid well. My base salary was $185,000 a year. With bonuses, my take-home often crossed $250,000. That money gave me a good life in Oak Brook, a suburb west of Chicago. I had a 4-bedroom home, a Lexus RX in the garage, and a wife who'd stuck with me through the early lean years. We were raising 2 kids, a daughter, 13, a son, 10. It looked like stability. It looked like success. But what no one outside my circle knew was that every bit of it rested on the trust I had built inside Barton and Crane. That trust was with one man in particular, Richard McKenna, the CEO. Richard was a giant in our industry, 6'4", silver hair that he never bothered to dye, the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room shrink. He had this reputation for ruthlessness, but for years, he treated me like a confidant. He pulled me into closed-door meetings. He asked for my judgment before billion-dollar decisions, and I thought, maybe foolishly, that we had a kind of loyalty. In the spring of 2022, Richard announced the biggest deal of his career. Barton and Crane was going to merge with a global logistics company called Ironvale. It was a $1 billion deal. The kind of transaction that could redefine entire industries, and I was one of less than a dozen people with full access to the numbers. For weeks, I lived inside spreadsheets, projections, and debt structures. I was the one who found the hidden landmines in Ironvale's balance sheets. I was the one who mapped the safest path forward. The nights were brutal, 14 hours at the office, weekends gone. My wife barely saw me. My kids were already asleep by the time I got home. But I told myself it would be worth it, because when the merger closed, the bonus pool alone would change my family's future. Then, one Monday morning in June, I opened my laptop at 6 a.m., and there it was. An email from Richard. The subject line read, "Termination of employment." At first I thought it was some kind of system error, but as I scrolled down, the words hit me like a hammer. Effective immediately, your services with Barton and Crane Holdings are no longer required. Your severance package will be detailed by HR within the week. No phone call, no meeting, just an email. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling on the keyboard. I thought about my mortgage. I thought about my daughter's private school tuition. I thought about my wife, who'd already sacrificed so much for my career. And then the anger came, because I knew what was really happening. Richard had cut me out on the eve of the biggest merger of his career. He decided I was expendable. He didn't want to share credit. He didn't want to share the payout. I was a liability to him now, because I knew too much, because I held too much truth in my hands. I tried calling in. No answer. I called HR. They gave me the script. Your termination was decided at the executive level. We cannot comment further. By 9 a.m., my corporate email was shut off. By noon, security was escorting me out of the building. 17 years of loyalty, gone in less than 6 hours. That evening, I sat in my driveway for nearly half an hour before walking inside. My wife opened the door, smiling like it was any other day, and I couldn't even look her in the eye. I just told her, "It's over. Richard fired me." She stared at me, waiting for a punchline. When she realized I wasn't joking, she collapsed into the nearest chair. Neither of us spoke for what felt like hours. That night, I lay awake replaying every meeting, every document, every detail I had touched in the Ironvale deal. And that's when I remembered something Richard didn't. Back in March, I had been the one to draft the first round of compliance disclosures. And in that process, I stumbled onto a file, an internal memo, something Richard thought he had buried. I hadn't looked at it in months, but now as I lay in the dark, I realized just how dangerous that document could be. Richard thought firing me by email would be the end of my story. But he had no idea what I was holding against him. And soon, he was going to learn. The morning after I was fired, I woke up and felt like the world had ended. My routine was gone. No emails, no conference calls, no spreadsheets waiting for me. Just silence. My wife left early to take the kids to school. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee. It had gone cold before I even took the first sip. That's when the panic really set in. I started adding the numbers in my head. The mortgage on our home in Oak Brook. The tuition for my daughter's private school, $22,000 a year. The after-school programs for my son. The insurance premiums. Without my salary, we had maybe 4 months before things started collapsing. I tried to tell myself I'd land on my feet. 17 years at Barton and Crane looked good on a resume. But in finance, word travels fast. If Richard had blackballed me, doors would close before I even knocked. I spent the next week in a fog, applying online, sending cold emails to old contacts, but I could feel the chill in their responses. Nobody wanted to be the guy who picked up the analyst Richard McKenna had tossed aside. One night, I opened my laptop just to stare at the empty inbox. That's when I remembered the old external hard drive in my desk drawer. I hadn't touched it since March, but something inside me said, open it. I dug it out, connected it, and started clicking through folders. Most of it was routine models, draft reports, old decks. Then I found the file. It was labeled innocuously, for compliance memo draft 3. I clicked it open, and there it was. A set of internal communications between Ironvale executives and Richard himself. The emails were blunt. Ironvale had been hiding liabilities, hundreds of millions in environmental fines tied to their shipping operations in Asia. If those numbers went public, the $1 billion merger would collapse instantly. Richard had known, and worse, he had signed off on keeping it buried. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, because suddenly my firing made sense. I wasn't just expendable, I was dangerous. Richard had cut me up before I could connect the dots. But here's the thing, he hadn't counted on me keeping the file. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up reading every line, every attachment, every footnote. By sunrise, I knew what I was holding: evidence of corporate fraud, evidence that could ruin Richard, Barton and Crane, and Ironvale in one shot. The next question was, what do I do with it? I couldn't just leak it online. That would blow back on me. I needed protection. I needed someone who understood exactly how to weaponize this without destroying me in the process. So I started making calls. Most lawyers brushed me off. Too risky, too expensive. One even said flat out, if you're going up against Barton and Crane, you're signing your own death warrant. But then a friend from business school gave me a name, Elaine Porter. She wasn't flashy. She didn't work for one of the big downtown firms. She ran a boutique practice out of Evanston. But her specialty, corporate whistleblower cases. I called her office. She picked up herself. Her voice was steady, clipped. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said 6 words that changed everything. Bring me the file. Today. I drove up to Evanston that afternoon. Her office was modest. No mahogany, no floor-to-ceiling windows. Just shelves of case files and a single-framed law degree from Northwestern. She read through the memo while I sat across from her. She didn't react, didn't flinch. She just kept flipping pages. Finally, she looked up. This isn't just a severance issue, she said. This is fraud on a scale that could trigger SEC action. And you, Michael, are sitting on the smoking gun. My hands were sweating. Does that mean I have leverage, she leaned forward. More than leverage. You have the power to decide how this merger ends, but you need to be careful. If Richard even suspects you're moving against him, he'll come after you hard. I left her office with my head spinning. For the first time since that termination email, I felt a spark of control. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't finished, but Elaine was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about taking on Richard McKenna himself, a man who had crushed dozens of careers without blinking. The thought made my stomach twist, but it also lit something inside me, a cold resolve. For years, I had made Richard richer. I had covered for his recklessness. I had convinced myself it was loyalty. Now, I had the chance to turn all of that against him. And as I drove back to Oak Brook that evening, the sky heavy with summer storm clouds, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The next time Richard saw me, it wouldn't be as his analyst. It would be as the man holding his entire empire in my hands. The first shot wasn't mine. It came from Richard. A week after meeting with Elaine, I got a letter in the mail, cease and desist, accusing me of stealing company property, threatening me with a lawsuit if I so much as breathed a word about Barton and Crane. I took it straight to Elaine. She read it once, smirked, and tossed it onto her desk. This is smoke, she said. They're bluffing. They're trying to scare you back into the shadows. But she wasn't playing defense. She filed a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission the very next morning, with my name on it, and the memo attached as Exhibit A. Once that was in motion, Richard couldn't touch me without looking like he was silencing a whistleblower. The law was on my side now. Still, I knew the storm was coming, and it came fast. Reporters camped outside Barton and Crane's offices. Iron Vale's stock started to wobble. Every time I checked the news, there was a new headline. Merger under scrutiny. Undisclosed liabilities at Iron Vale. McKenna silent on allegations. Richard stayed quiet for a week. Then he broke. He went on CNBC, all smiles, calling me a disgruntled former employee, saying I had fabricated documents, saying I was bitter. But Elaine had anticipated this. She had already delivered the files to the sex forensic accountants, and within days, they confirmed the authenticity. Richard wasn't facing rumors anymore. He was facing federal investigation. That's when the calls started coming, first from HR, then from Barton and Crane's board. They wanted to open a dialogue, to find a resolution. Elaine told me to ignore them. We weren't negotiating on their terms. We were holding out until they had to negotiate on ours. By late September, Iron Vale's shareholders filed their own lawsuit, claiming they had been misled, claiming the merger was tainted. Richard's empire was cracking, and he knew exactly who was swinging the hammer. One evening, just after putting my kids to bed, I got a call, blocked number. I answered, and there he was. Richard. His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. You think you've won, Michael? You think this ends well for you? I didn't. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, I'm not the one who buried the liabilities. Richard, you did. And now everyone knows. He cursed. Then the line went dead. That was the last time I ever heard his voice directly. Because within weeks, Barton and Crane's board forced him out, resigned, they called it, but we all knew the truth. And for me, that's when the real negotiation began. Elaine pushed for a settlement. We had leverage. We had the documents. We had the SEC breathing down their necks. After 3 months of back and forth, Barton and Crane made their offer, $7.5 million. When Elaine read me the number, I couldn't speak. It was more money than I had made in 17 years at the firm. More money than I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime. She leaned back in her chair and said, take it. This is as good as it gets without dragging this through trial for 5 years. So I took it. The settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement. I couldn't talk about the finer details, but the money hit my account in December, and I paid off my mortgage the next day. Richard, He disappeared from Chicago, the last I heard. He was living in Arizona, out of the spotlight, reputation in shreds. He'll never work in finance again. As for me, I didn't go back to corporate life. I didn't need to. I invested smart, set up college funds for my kids. And for the first time in 2 decades, I started sleeping 8 hours a night. Sometimes, when I drive past Barton and Crane's office downtown, I think about all those years, the loyalty, the late nights, the sacrifices, and I realize something. Richard thought he was cutting me out of his empire, but in the end, I cut him out of mine. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it comes heavy, and it leaves scars. If you felt the satisfaction of justice served, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps bring these stories to light. Thanks for watching.